Welcome to the Origin Story, an Eko-Podcast series brought to you by the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy, in collaboration with Roundglass Sustain. The Origin Story is created in the hope that we live in and leave a planet that is more just, more joyful, and more diverse across lands, oceans, and species. We bring conversations with giants in the field, those who've walked the uncharted path and done right by the beautiful biodiversity of our shared planet. What were their early connections to the natural world? How did they come to be the person they are today? And what are some of the lessons for the rest of us towards building a better world? In this episode, we bring you the fierce and brilliant wildlife conservationist Cara Tejpal in conversation with writer, environmentalist, and the original great of Indian conservation, Bittu Sahgal. And once again, thank you for your interest in our planet, biodiversity, and closely interlinked our own well-being. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Bittu Mama, and really happy to be able to talk to you like this and about actually a lot of questions I have for you from a long time ago. For people who are listening, Bittu Sahgal is synonymous with India's environmental movement. He is a man who wears very many hats. I think he quite modestly only refers to himself as the editor of Sanctuary Asia magazine, India's oldest wildlife magazine, and a vessel and a editorial endeavor that for decades has been chronicling India's environmental movement and, of course, documenting its incredible wildlife. But Sanctuary is an umbrella term. Under the banner of Sanctuary and under the guidance of Bittu, there have been innumerable projects launched, innumerable careers launched, innumerable campaigns and movements developed and inspired. And beyond that, I think there have been other projects that perhaps started off as offshoots and then turned into their own kind of massive undertakings, whether that's Kids for Tigers or your Cocoon Conservancy project. And while you've been playing this role of communicator, you've also spent so much time behind the scenes, serving on innumerable boards and committees and, government bodies, many of which actually are completely hidden from the public eye. Most people have no idea what goes on inside these boardrooms, what kind of decisions are taken about not just the environment, but about the future for all of us, right? I think one of your most oft-repeated phrases is that the economy is a wholly... Can you tell me what that is?
It's a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. And that's actually Herman Daly who said that, either the environmental economist from way back.
And that's something we hear so often from you, that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment. So, of course, now when we talk about these things, these are buzzwords that everybody has on the tip of their tongues, on the tip of their fingers. But 40, 50 years ago, I think you were seen as something of a loose cannon and a maverick. So, okay, we're going to touch upon all these things. This is Bittu Sahgal, the most incredible human I happen to know. And I'm Cara Tejpal. I'm a writer and a wildlife conservationist. I do a couple of other odd jobs. I've known Bittu since I was 11 years old when I joined Sanctuary's Kids for Tigers program. And that really set me on a path and showed me that there are many ways to kind of channel my love for nature, for the outdoors, for wildlife. And I ended up working with Sanctuary for 8 to 10 years and continue to plug in and lean on Sanctuary. Bittu Mama, I wanted to ask you, all of us are quite fundamentally shaped by our childhoods. I want to really understand your earliest childhood memories, where you grew up, what was home like, and, what was the atmosphere you were in?
My childhood memories, I think, were not very exceptional, in the sense that, yes, my father was a government servant. He was traveling all over. I went to 7 schools in 9 years because his transfers would be done. So that, in a sense, shaped me without a shadow of doubt. I was born in Simla and I grew up in Calcutta. And I can only say this, that I grew up at a different time of life. We never had any worries. The worries were, I didn't finish my homework. What am I going to do? There was never a worry. In my home, I do not remember ever having discussions or conversations forced on what's happening. I was born in 1947. I never fought for freedom. My parents, that's another story altogether. But I was born at a very wonderful time, and I wish I could gift your generation the same kind of freedom of thought, mind, safety, decency, all those things, which I don't see happening in India today.
Yeah, I wish that too. And I think, you being a Midnight's child, having your parents see India gain its independence, you growing up now in this just fresh new nation, what was the culture of home? Was there an interest in nature? Was there an interest in the outdoor? Were you leaning towards art and literature? Was there conversation about spirituality, atheism? Because we were also at this juncture, at that point where the country had to choose between the kind of Gandhian socialism that was available and then this more economy-heavy outlook on the world, really driven by the West.
No, I'll tell you that actually, as a family that was government employed, my father was Life Insurance Corporation. My father didn't fight for the freedom movement. So there wasn't any great talk about that. But I will tell you this, that in our family, viscerally, who were our heroes? It was Rajendra Prasad, it was Mahatma Gandhi, it was people who fought for freedom. And I grew up being grateful for the fact that I lived in a free country. I'm talking about when I was 12, 13, 14. Before that, I was just a kid playing games, and having a good time. I would say that I grew up at a time when you didn't exceptionally say, oh, he's an ethical man, or it was taken for granted. If you were not ethical, you were almost outcast. And it comes to me as a bit of a surprise right now that people can be unethical and still be heroes. I don't understand that. I still don't understand that.
Yeah, and I actually think that's something you really, from my earliest memories of you, your refrain was choose your heroes, choose them carefully. And I think that's really kind of plugs into what you're talking about right now, about how natural it was for you to grow up having heroes that were actually people who looked out for the world. I also know that you are the youngest of many siblings, correct?
Yes. We were 2 elder brothers, 2 elder sisters, and spoilt by my parents, they would insist. Bullied by my elders sometimes, I would insist. But I had a lovely growing up. I have to say, I was so safe. I was so happy. I think that happiness continues even till today, the memories of that.
In so many ways, I guess then your childhood was actually not just sheltered, but quite conventional. You were on this path, you're going to, go to school.
I think studying in Bishop Cotton School in Simla, walking through forests just to get anywhere, put something inside me. I can't say what it was exactly because at that point I didn't quite understand it. But when I revisited Simla, something like 15 years later, I had no idea why I was crying. I had no idea. I fell in love with nature. It was one of those things. It wasn't Calcutta that gave me that love. It was Simla.
Wow. So where did it go? When does the penny drop for you? That, yes, of course, many people love nature. Everybody loves walking outdoors. Thousands, millions of Indians get to visit national parks as some part of the yearly kind of, planning and holidaying. But when does the penny drop for you? You're not coming from a family that's actually pushing you towards, social work, environmentalism. In fact, environmentalism is still a relatively new kind of, I would say, subject almost. So where do you go from Bishop Cotton School? What are the kind of touch points that you reach that kind of turn you?
The touch point was so unplanned, so varied, as to not be able to be put in a box and say this was the touch point. But I still hold on to the fact that Simla, its forest, its peace, its magic, it still lives in me right now. In fact, when I see photographs of Simla today, and I've been back to Simla once, I've almost decided I'm not going to go back because Paradise Revisited is not a happy experience. So I fell in love with nature in Simla, but I fell in love with all nature, not just what was there in Simla. And when you fall in love with something and somebody tries to harm it, you tend to defend it. So one thing led to another, the defense of this, the defense of that, the writing of this, the reading the poetry, everything seemed to suggest to me that I would be happiest if nature were allowed to be as it is and if I were somebody that could experience it. So I don't know if I've really answered your question, but...
You have partly. I think it's very fair to reach here, but I want to know the tip over. Many people can feel this way, but when do you move from, okay, this maybe a regular salaried job towards, you know what, I can risk not living a conventional life and actually start move into something that's completely unpredictable and untrammeled as of the time?
See, mine was a very strange thing, Simla, I love nature, this, that, and the other. But do you know what my first job was? I left Simla and in Calcutta doing my BCom. It was 6 to 9. And then from 9 to 6, I was selling plastic buckets to the chemical industry. I had a motorbike of my own. I thought I was going places. That was what I wanted to do. I just wanted to have a lot of fun. But somewhere inside me, that utter love of nature, it was visceral. I really can't put a descriptor on it. But that coupled with the ethics that I grew up with post-independence, everybody felt that you're a good person if you do something for your country, for your people, you help other people. I grew up in that. It was like a fish to water. I didn't have to think. I didn't have to try. In fact, right now, I feel I'm a fish out of water. Again, I don't answer questions directly, but that's
all right. And it's quite unimaginable to me what you have seen this country become, what you grew up with and what it is now, I cannot imagine. I already feel that in my short 35 years, I have seen the world change. And for you, that must be, if you can reach back into your childhood, into when you were 12, 13, 14, 15, what that world was, what the cities looked like, what the sense of hope or optimism was, the excitement of the internet much later on. It's quite unimaginable to someone like me, but I do like to think about it and ponder on it and understand how the time shapes the generation. So this visceral love for nature, I know it's bubbling in you. I know Simla ignited something in you. I realized that selling plastic buckets was probably leaving you feeling a little hollow. And then there's the influence of a place that births sanctuary, and that's Ranthambore. When did Ranthambore enter your life?
Well, I'd put it like this. Everything that I was doing as a salesperson sort of came to a flashing point. I fell in love with my wife to be, and there was difficulty. She came from a family which said that, look, I'm not going to get my daughter married to a salesman, and I have to get a profession. So I came to Bombay. I got myself a profession. I became an advertising guy. Doing what? Selling toothpastes and powders and soft drinks and things like this. And I felt the hollowest at that time doing that. So I'm just a very confused amalgam of so many things. But this much is clear. I came to Bombay. I joined mass communication and marketing. It was one of the hot shops. And I learned the art of communication. And the moment I learned the art of communication, I began to actually be able to do something, using the art of communication and the strategy of communication to put ideas across. We'll shift, say, 5, 6 years, 8 years. After I did that, I started Sanctuary magazine because my love of nature took me, my wife, our 2 children to Ranthambore thrice a year. Our bags were left there and we would just land up in a train. And I met Fateh Singh Rathod, who I made the mistake of one rather drunken night around a campfire, asking him that, Fateh, I want to do something. I'm not a tourist. I want to do something to help you. So in a very sarcastic way, he said, you go back, have a few parties every year, every month, come back, because you Bombay guys are worth nothing else other than having a few parties. So I said, no, please tell me. I thought first he was asking me to have some parties to raise some money. I didn't know how to raise money. But to cut a long story short, I did make a promise to him that I will never come back unless you tell me what to do. So he said that there are 30 sports magazines, 50 magazines on politics. There are 200 magazines on films and things like this. Where's the wildlife magazine? So I said, okay, I'll start a wildlife magazine. Otherwise, I will never come back. Drunken evening. So I had no experience. I had no money. I borrowed 27,000 rupees from my father. He was very upset because he said, you've never ever borrowed money. I've always told you never a borrower or a lender be. What do you want this money for, etc. But again, to cut the story short, I came back 9 months later in 1981 and I handed Fateh Singh that magazine. And actually the handover of that magazine became something that committed me for life. I might have just said something. Quarter after quarter, I had to keep producing that. So I got more and more engaged, like the Brer Rabbit story. You get stuck in the tar baby. I got stuck with the tar baby, which I love to today. I've just lived the most fortunate, happy life because I don't think I was born to do anything other than what I'm doing right now.
I love to hear that, Bittu Mama. I hope more and more people feel this way and get to feel this way in the future. We all have to make meaning and find meaning in our lives. And if we can do that, then maybe it's worth the time spent on this planet. Those early days, I know you were a young father. You had 2 little girls. You had a wife. You had a house to run. Now you had this commitment you've made and this promise you've made. It must have been quite mad. It must have been a flurry of activity. It must have been late nights at the press and then home and then travels. And I cannot even imagine how difficult it must have been dealing with all the many egos that come along with putting out published work, whether it's photographers or writers or editors or anybody else. In all of this, now we live in an age we have so much therapy speak, terms like climate anxiety, climate resilience, imposter syndrome. These are things that are bandied about quite freely. Everybody wants to really get into what it is. I don't think you had the vocabulary for these things back then. But when you today, sitting in your home and you can see road, reflect upon those early days of Sanctuary, do you actually see some of these things creeping in? Was there this feeling of, what am I doing? I'm in over my head. Or, oh my God, I can't do it. I've overcommitted. I should get back onto the straight and narrow. Where was that personal resilience forged from?
My whole life, I've never thought of quitting this, Never. Not even for 10 seconds. I might think in terms of phasing things out now. I'm 78 years old. But way back then, it became a challenge. There were people who told me, you're starting a magazine? Okay, we'll pay for your funeral expenses. Other than that, you look after yourself. So it became a challenge. I rise to challenges. If somebody challenges me, I rise to them. And partly that was the catalyst for coping with bad times. And I also met wonderful people. I met, Babuji, who was Conway Printers, the owner of Conway Printers, Mr. Agarwal. And his sons were a friend of mine who printed the first issue of Sanctuary. And I went to him and said, look, I may not be able to pay you immediately because until the ad revenue comes in, he said, tu Bhagwan ka kaam kar rahe ho. I'm not a Bhagwan ka kaam karne wala. I did it from a very selfish reason. This was all I wanted to do. But he said that you just print the magazine when you get the money pay. And so I got my first help there. But even before that, I was on the executive committee of the Bombay Natural History Society. If you ask me what cemented, you have 2 tubes of araldite, one this, one that. The BNHS was the one that cemented my life. I met up with Dr. Salim Ali. I met up with J.C. Daniel. I met up with Hawk, R.E. Hawkins, who was Jim Corbett's editor. And I was like a babe in the woods and they adopted me. They said that, look, X, Y, Z. In fact, when the magazine came out, even before Fateh Singh saw it, I showed it to Salim Ali and he looked through it all and then he said, congratulations. And I was puffed up and all. I said, oh, Rabi, like the magazine. You've just invented 2 new species. I'd made a spelling mistake in a scientific thing. So I learned at the feet of some of the finest people in one of the finest organizations that exists anywhere in the world, the Bombay Natural History Society. So I got an amalgam of a love for nature and a respect for science. So that was really how Sanctuary continued forever. Till now, it's been 45 plus years.
I can see that. I can see the influence of these greats, as you call them, on Sanctuary and on the projects and on the philosophy and on the kind of emotion you wish to evoke in your team. Since we're on the subject and before we move on to some of the Sanctuary projects I want to ask about, in no particular order, I mean, whoever comes to mind, who truly are some of those, really powerful influences on your work and your philosophy?
I think Salim Ali, without a shadow of doubt. Equally, Humayun Abdul Ali. Both apart, these 2 people, both of them fantastic human beings. Humayun Abdul Ali said, what the hell do you think you're doing? What qualifies you to do this? You don't know X from Y, And when he saw the magazine, eventually, he went through it like this and he sort of said, it's a good attempt, but it won't last. So I said, why won't it last? And he says, because you don't have the knowledge. So I said, no, but the knowledge is not mine. I'm only an interpreter. The knowledge comes from you. And he said, not from me. This was at an executive committee meeting of the BNHS. And that's when R.E. Hawkins actually adopted me. He literally sat me down and told me what editing was, how it was, what it was, etc. And I'm going off the question that you asked, but it was magical. I think the best thing that ever happened to me was this particular blindfold that cut everything else out, but I could only see where I wanted to go. And Sanctuary was a direct result of that. It was, I will not give up. I'm stubborn also.
So, you know how in the natural world we have specialists and generalists, and each has their place. And I think in many ways you are a generalist in that you have your fingers in a lot of different pies. You are able to see perhaps the bigger picture when it comes to what we call the climate crisis now, but maybe 40, 50 years ago was not referred to as so. And I know this was a point at which the climate denial industry was also in full force. So did you ever have that experience of feeling like you're barking up the wrong tree? I imagine there was a lot of dismissive attitudes towards the message you were taking out to the world.
There were two things that happened when Sanctuary came out. At that point, a lot of people who loved wildlife. I mean, to give you an example, Air India had a huge hoarding at Nariman Point, and it was a deer with tears dropping down its eyes and saying, "Save the deer." And it took just a few meetings with Salim Ali and Humayun Abdul Ali to say that, look, please stay away from animal welfare per se and understand that what you're doing is actually protecting species. You're protecting all the animals in that species, this species, that species. And I learned at their feet, literally, sitting at the BNHS and listening to all this. And I am a generalist, okay? In fact, there's very often I take out young kids who are 13 and 14-year-olds and they identify the bird and they identify this. And forest guard says, you see this? It's called pentafolia. But it's got 10 petals. So how is that got 10 petals? Because each petal goes into two. This is a forest guard. So I learned from so many people, big, small, north, south, east, west, young, old. I'm just an amalgam. I'm actually Sanctuary magazine itself,
Undoubtedly, and I think almost everyone will agree with me on that. Sanctuary, let's talk projects. I think over the years, over the decades, Sanctuary has spearheaded multiple incredible projects. Some folded, some continue to date. Also a huge variety of campaigns and movements that either were pioneered or supported by Sanctuary. I want to hear about your favorite Sanctuary projects, your favorite Sanctuary moments.
If you ask me which is the project that's closest to my heart apart from the magazine, it's Kids for Tigers. I actually start every meeting that we have with an apology. I say, I'm sorry, my generation is actually colonizing you. We are the East India Company replaced. We're all colonizing your land, we're colonizing your water. And I wonder sometimes, Cara, I really wonder, what is it that allows us to wake up every day and walk, knowing full well that we are taking away from the children that which belongs to them? No, not that which keeps them alive. I mean, look around us. So in a sense, my resolve right now is tinged with a touch of anger, but I'm not an angry person. I use rationality, and that's why we now work at the tri-junction of biodiversity, economics, and climate change, saying it's in your self-interest. And that's why we want to change a generation. Kids for Tigers, I think, is more important than the magazine Sanctuary, because Kids for Tigers is an adult literacy program. And we went into the Limca Book of Records for getting 10 lakh signatures. We went to, at that point, Atal Bihari Vajpayee and handed him all these signatures. And he said कि जब बच्चे जागरूक हो गए हैं तो फिर बुजुर्ग क्यों सो रहे हैं, So kids can influence adults. And I think that we owe it to the children not only to use them to influence adults, but to keep in them that seed that will go up and understand that good old Herman Daly, we're just a part of the environment. We're not different. We're animals. We're bumped up monkeys.
I think the concept of intergenerational colonization is so powerful and so poignant at this moment. And I look around me and now I'm in that age where all my friends, my cousins, my families, everyone's popping babies. And it is actually something to think about very deeply, that you're bringing life into this world. But two things: is this a world worth bringing life into? And are you going to bring up life that is worth inheriting this world? I think that's a heavy question, but I don't think that's a question that most people think about or take heavily. But for anyone who's listening, I hope the idea of intergenerational colonization really sits. We went off on a bit of a tangent, but I want to draw you back which was about the sanctuary projects. So we have the magazine. There's, of course, Sanctuary Asia magazine, and then the kids' version, Sanctuary Cup, which is actually your favorite baby, that you tend to like the grown-up version better. Then Kids Tigers, which is your children's communication and outreach program that at its peak was reaching over 1 million individuals. And then there are a few others. You spoke about the films. What did that come under? Was there a project title?
No, at that point, Sanctuary Nature Foundation was not even born. When Sanctuary was started, it was, so to speak, a for-profit which never made profit. I had to sort of do the Bharatnatyam on the side, and the gate money paid for editors and things like this, And that went on for a long time. But now it's the Sanctuary Nature Foundation. And
I just want to know about some of the other projects under the Sanctuary umbrella.
see, what happened was that when we were talking about things like protecting the tiger and things, there was always this. I don't shy away from the fact that I was attacked by people saying that, look, you're wasting money, you're wasting time, you're diverting attention. I was accused of being a CIA spy because I was coming in the way of industrial projects that were going to take away large swatches of forest, destroy large amounts of our water resources that we had. So I had opposition. I had serious opposition, and it wasn't an easy ride. There was never enough money. There was never full support. But the people who did support, like the Bombay Natural History Society, WWF, all these organizations, they gave me the strength that I needed to continue. And I never answer questions directly. So pardon me if I go off slightly, and you can just...
That's totally all right. Actually, what I was hoping for you to speak about was Cocoon, the Sanctuary Wildlife Awards, and Mud on Boats. These are three, I don't want to call them verticals. It's such a weird corporate term for actually things that are full of life and love. But can you tell me a little about Cocoon?
I will. Seeing so much damage take place around, I realized that relying upon government alone will not work. We had to get people involved. As it is, there was a big divide between human rights and the environment guys saying that you're saving tigers. It's a sort of elitist concept and things like this. And the idea of Cocoon was that if we didn't rewild in some form, and if the rewilding didn't benefit the communities themselves, then we were doomed, that there was nothing going to work, So Cocoon Conservancy actually stood and stands for Community-Owned, Community-Operated Nature Conservancy. Now, vast portions of India's farmland, particularly those farmlands that are abutting our best protected areas, they are not able to sustain the people who are farming. If it's not floods and it's not droughts, then it's the animals that come out, the ones that we're looking out, and one herd of wild boar can wipe out a whole year's crop, a whole year's work. So I'd say that, Cocoon Conservancy was one of the things. And when we found that other people were not looking at this, we said that we'll just do a demonstration to show that it can work. And we had all kinds of problems. But the conservancy that we originally started with in Maharashtra, I'd put it like this, that there were human failures that took place, and there were human lessons that I learned, that don't trust everybody, etc. But nature doesn't care whether a good guy is rewilding or a bad guy is rewilding. When we rewilded this area, it bounced back. Just the same way as Project Tiger did. Kailash Tankla, Fateh Singh Rathod said, don't do anything, don't plant trees, don't do anything, it just comes back. So we suggested that, look, you're right next to the germplasm, and don't worry, the birds, the butterflies, the bees, the monkeys, they will do the planting. You don't do anything to this. Just don't put pesticides, fertilizers, and don't ask for food from this. We will give you. So we got supported by people, and we spent 70 lakhs of rupees over a period of 2 years to give these people the money that they would earn, and it came back. And at this moment in time, I'm not mentioning where, how, what. I'm just telling you that at this moment in time, the place that we had chosen then has become possibly one of Maharashtra's richest biodiverse areas. There are tigers there. There are photographs of a tigress with 4 cubs, which she was able to bring up, which means that there was prey, there was food, there was water, there was everything else. But we wanted to expand that, and we're doing that now because climate change is causing a lot of problems for a lot of other people. For instance, tea, for instance, coffee, for instance, all the monocultures that you see. So these estates are now coming back. So Cocoon Conservancy was basically community-owned, community-operated nature conservancies where the benefits should also be shared with the community itself. And community doesn't mean farmers alone. It could be a community of lodge owners that come together and do this. But we insist that the people that ring these areas must become primary beneficiaries. And the return of biodiversity, it must pass through the filter of the local community, the benefits, before being distributed by commerce.
It is an incredible project, the idea of bringing back to life degraded farmlands, degraded wildernesses that remain in the ownership of local and indigenous communities, which bring in then, more sustainable livelihood options and actually outside of but expand India's protected area network. So I think it's a pretty incredible idea. I know that there have been proof of concept projects around the world on this. And I really do hope that the idea of rewilding continues to gain momentum as it is. This is a great point for me to kind of leap into, I think, a lesser understood and a lesser known facet of your work, and that's your political engagement. And I put political in because, yes, you've been a communicator. Okay, you were a plastic bucket salesman, you were a chartered accountant, you were just a kid who loves nature. And then you were given this challenge by Fateh Singh Rathore. Now you start a magazine. Now from the magazine grow other things, right? Now you have a kids education program. Now you're creating films. Now you're instituting awards to recognize undeserved and unsung, wilderness heroes. And then there's the advocacy and the kind of behind the scenes lobbying, report writing, following up and frustrations. And I think actually this aspect of environmentalism, wildlife conservation is perhaps, I won't say the most important, but as important as protecting forests or rewilding degraded land. But it's the least understood and possibly the most tedious of the work. This is not you enjoying a forest. This is not you writing about the birds and the bees. This is you really getting into the belly of the political system that's hungry for land, hungry for resource. So I want to understand, at what point did you switch from communications to a more active involvement in policy?
It was gradual, but I got sucked in. I have a friend called Brajendra Singh. At that point, he was on the National Board for Wildlife. And I've been talking to him about, he was part of some of the filming we did. And he says, why don't you join one of the government's expert committees? Because what you're talking about is what we need. And I learned very, very quickly that places that were either declared national parks or places that were rewilded or anything, I learned one lesson from that experience. It was not a very good one. I had to deal with politicians. I had to deal with very powerful people whose objectives were short-term while my objectives were long-term. So I discovered this. All victories are temporary and all defeats become permanent. So that was the real lesson that I learned. And it led me to understand that unless there is self-interest in the people that live around the parks, these parks will never be able to sustain themselves after I go. And if you look around now, tourism was one of the things that we had put forward as a potential controlled tourism. And Ranthambore, when we went over there, Cara, there was nobody. There were no tourists when we went there. Today, it's an 800 crore rupee turnover per annum. And that's not good. It doesn't need to be that big. It's just one of those things. But of this, not even toothpickings are going to the community around. So our community-owned, community-operated nature conservancies, we talk to a lot of people in the tourism industry, Toft, Responsible Tourism Society of India, and we've got phenomenal responses from them. And today, if you look at the lodges, the sensible lodges, outside these parks, they've got largish areas, 40 acres, 50 acres, 60 acres, some of them 100 acres, where nature has just come back. And those are being used by wild species. As I said, nature doesn't care who rewilded it. You could be a murderer, you could be a thief, you could be a politician, you could be nothing. So long as it comes back, the beetles, the soil bacteria, etc. will come back. Now, at the risk of going on a little bit longer, I will say this, that I met people like Lord Nicholas Stern from the London School of Economics. I read up about people like Professor Sir Partha Dasgupta, who wrote the Dasgupta Review. Then there was, before that, the Stern Review. And they said, in no uncertain words, that Herman Daly's thing, that the economy is a wholly owned subsidiary of the environment, is the way to go if you want to protect now. Don't treat people who are doing commerce as some kind of evil guys. They just don't understand that these are infrastructure. The example that I got from one of these wonderful human beings was that if you had to build an infrastructure, let's say a road, you don't take a road and build it over a railway line because you've already got the alignment. You've got to place it in the right place, that you don't destroy one infrastructure to build another one on top of it. And that is what we are doing now. We're explaining that forests, grasslands, wetlands, everything, soils, mountains, glaciers, shores, mangroves, these are infrastructures with hard commercial value. These are the ones that enable GDP of countries to stay GDP of countries. And the combination of biodiversity and climate change, not a combination, it's the same thing. The carbon cycle is the biodiversity that exists under the soil. It carries it, it brings it down. We keep shifting the narrative literally almost every month as we learn more and more. The sea, the oceans, what we're doing to the ocean currents, that's affecting the monsoon. It boggles my mind why people who are allegedly very powerful, allegedly very rich, allegedly very intelligent, don't get the picture. They cannot live without this. So let's forget the tone and things like this, but I think that an adult literacy program is badly needed because my generation of adults are culpable. History will not forgive us. They will, like the Nuremberg trials, there will be trials for crimes against the biosphere. And there is, as you can see, a touch of anger in me still, but it's more frustration than anger. I believe that the children are the ones that will determine things.
I'm really happy to hear the anger because most of my generation feels very angry at the state of the world we've been handed and the inescapable feeling that we're beyond a point of no return. And in some ways we are, and in other ways, yes, sure, we can pull back and maybe reduce and dilute the impacts that are going to come down on us. Bittu Mama, while we're talking about your engagement with policy and lobbying, I just want any listener who's tuning in to know that it's actually quite an opaque labyrinth, India's environmental policy. And there are many hoops you have to jump through, and there's all kinds of paperwork and laws and legalities that actually no one is really educated about. Any one of us that stumbles into doing any kind of activism or campaigning or even interest in these things is really left untangling a massive tangled ball of wool, For example, I know you've been on the standing committee of the National Board for Wildlife, you've been on the State Board of Wildlife in Maharashtra, you've been on endless expert appraisal committees, and many more. Can you paint me a picture of what these boardrooms look like and supplement them with two things? One, a project that got away from you, maybe somewhere where you felt failure. And I know this is actually probably a very common feeling to have when working for the environment. And the other, where you actually, not just you, but your other members on a committee or a board could actually band together and change or stop policy change, depending on what the project was.
Look, I'll tell you the one project that stands out in terms of failure and poetic justice is, I would say, the Enron project. At that point, I was on the committee, so was Shyam Chainani. I miss him. He's gone. He passed. So Enron was the one thing that told me that, look, no matter what happens, don't get under any pressure. We were under a tremendous amount of pressure to approve that and just put a rubber stamp. We didn't. Enron's gone. We're still here.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I have to ask, it's public knowledge, it's widely known that anybody who stands up to powers that be, who annoys or pisses off the rich, the powerful, can come in the crosshairs. When you talk about pressures, what does that mean? What kind of pressures have you faced? Of course, you don't need to name people or projects or events,
No.
But an understanding of what it actually entails.
See, what it entails is that sometimes I think we are put over there just as consultants, that they bring in people like Shyam Chainani and myself, put us on the committees, and then they very cleverly use 2-3 letters changed in the laws that we have to write, if deemed necessary, without prior permission. Now just those two things can set up an entire supermarket. In other words, all the laws that we wrote, India has the best environmental laws, best coastal protection laws in the world, but the implementation was zero. And that zero implementation was purely because of short-term objectives. Sometimes it was profit, sometimes it was power, sometimes it was stupidity. Enron was one of those things that completely decided us that I don't give a damn what people think of me. I don't give a damn about what they say. Sham and myself were thrown off the committees very quickly. When a government changed, they put us on again, and then again they threw us off.
Yeah.
So you just reconstitute the committees, the game is fixed. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, I think that's beautifully put. And I think that it also underscores why having your pulse on both this side of things, the boardroom and the, decision-making side of things, while also actually and actively pursuing grassroots movements, campaigns, and, individuals is so important. One cannot exist without the other anymore. Or maybe other. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Bittu Mama, you have a reputation for being the eternal optimist, the Mr. Nice Guy. If someone is wanting to take a bit of a sharper tone, they'll say, oh, but you play both sides. Why are you good to people who are, nice or polite to people who are ruining the planet? Or you either choose the environment or you choose the community. I know you have been on this tightrope and playing this balancing act for as long as I've known you, and probably for a long time before that. Is this strategy? Is this just who you really are? Is it a mask that allows you to get work done? Today I'm hearing anger in your voice. It's not something I hear very often. And I actually love to hear it because we want to see us as reflected in the book we love and admire. And I feel a lot of anger. So I really want to know, how do you do it? I think this is perhaps the most enigmatic and incredible thing about you, that no matter what side you are taking, you are able to be likable and, in fact, loved by everybody.
I don't know about everybody, but I will say yes. Cara, the thing is that I'm viscerally not permanently angry. I might get angry today, but that's one part of it. And the other thing is that I tend to look at the other side, and say that why is the person saying something like this? And that helps me strategize. Now, I've come to this conclusion right now that it's almost a waste of time talking to my generation. It's almost a waste of time because they're gone. It's like a drug addict who's not capable of being repaired in time, which is why we are now focusing on children. But in this meanwhile, a lot of damage that is being done by my generation, we try and point out that, look, you're not going to have enough water. India does not have enough water to do all the various things that are being promised by yesterday's politicians, today's, and I can believe tomorrow. I mean, if an industrialist wants X amount of water, he's going to have to take it away from a farmer. If you want to promise the farmers X, Y, Z, they're going to have to take it away from the industrialist. And look at our dam. We keep building dams after dams after dams, but their silt is the Achilles heel. So you deforest the catchment, silt is coming down. So we use rationality to the extent that we can. And yes, I've gone to court. I've gone to the Supreme Court. We won a few things. We managed to get, the Godavarman case, for instance, which said that protect the forest because without the forest, India won't survive kind of thing. It's been ratified right now as the leading cause. The leading cause of our climate crises is the fact that the machinery that pulls the carbon down has been destroyed. It's not just timber. It's the fact that there's a misunderstanding that's taken place. So it's like a pendulum. You swing between going to court, angry, saying this, saying that, never getting personal. I cannot remember the last time I was personal or I named an individual, or I don't feel like that because I believe that everybody is doing what they do because they have to do it from their perspective. My job is to stop them if that perspective is going to hurt my kid. And intergenerational colonization, I can assure you, I can promise you that there are going to be the equivalent of Nuremberg trials held, because those trials that were held post-war, you had to dig up the information. Who was the criminal? Who was doing this? Right now, those guys are out there beating their chests. We're doing this. So all the evidence is there. They are creating the climate crises. They are aggravating the climate crises, and they are destroying the future of our children tomorrow. The glaciers are melting. The soils are getting salinized along our entire coast because we are interrupting the flow of fresh water. The Bangladesh and some Sundarbans, we're going to see the equivalent of, I don't know, 10 million, 20 million, 30 million people moving north because of salinization, not drowning, not, again, that wolf. I have to keep that wolf inside me, So I'm talking to you guys right now without a filter. But when I go out to a meeting, I don't talk like this. I will say that, look, here's what the thing is. Fresh water keeps coastal aquifers, the salinity out. If you slow the fresh water down, the salinity will come down. And we're talking 6,000 running kilometers of coastal areas, which will become such that people will have to move away from them.
Bittu Mama, I have to say, I think you saying, I don't know what will happen is actually so much of what it is. We know it's going to be bad. But the actual cascade effects that we're going to see, I don't think we're able to comprehend them in their entirety. And we're already seeing the climate crisis play out in different ways across the world. The world knows you as Bittu Sahgal, but the people around you and the people who work with you know you as Bittu and Madhu. And I really want to understand the personal, No one gets to live a life that is so aligned, dedicated, full, if their life partner isn't right by their side or encouraging it. So I want to understand how your wife, how Madhu auntie, has impacted your journey as an environmentalist.
Cara, there were times when I wasn't earning any money at all. I was just engaged in this whole thing. And Madhu had 15 women who were doing screen printing stuff, which we used to make posters and things like this. So I was a kept man for a very, very long time. And it was not just being a kept man, it was being somebody who shared every ounce of every nuance. Otherwise, the absences, the business of irritating powerful people, these are not things that any family feels comfortable, with. So it's not just Madhu. I married this wonderful, wonderful girl who I met at the age of, he was 16. I was not yet 18. And I don't know where I begin and where she ends and the other way around, but she gave me what has turned out to be two very powerful women. I have my two daughters. So when we have arguments like this on the table, sometimes I have one firebrand daughter who says, "Dad, don't please judge men by your standards. You're an honorary woman. We have trained you, And in a sense, in my quieter moments, I cope with ecological grief, knowing full well that my loyalty is for the biosphere. My loyalty is not for Cara or not for Shreyas or anybody. My loyalty is to the biosphere. And the biosphere hasn't lost, incidentally, for the last 2 billion years. So I don't see any way in which this puny little monkey is going to be able to do much. Water will be, Yuval Aves, you've heard of him? A most wonderful, wonderful young man who sort of said something we gave him a young naturalist award, and he said that you can measure climate in carbon, but its mother tongue is water. And that is at the heart of everything we're talking about today. The mother tongue is water. Water will be the instrument by which the powerful will be brought to their knees. And I hope that they don't break their knees. I hope that they recover, because we need their expertise. We need them to be convinced. Right now, we're in the cusp of trying to convince people, and ours is a long-term versus short-term battle. It's not a battle for a forest or anything else.
Bittu Mama, I have one last question and one request.
Yeah.
My question is, why do you keep the faith? Even big picture, when you look at it all, why do you keep the faith? How is this optimism still burning so bright? And I'd like you, after you answer this question, to tell our listeners the Dalai Lama story, because I think everybody needs to hear it. And no matter how many times I hear it, I want to hear it again always.
I keep the faith in a very straightforward way. It's not just a larger picture. The biosphere is never lost. This system is magical. It's self-repairing. During the pandemic, if we didn't see blue skies, we could look into the Yamuna and actually see something, I mean, everything was okay. Yes, we had that pandemic, which Professor Dasgupta said was a direct result of the destruction of biodiversity. So, in a sense, I know that everything will repair. And we have to make a choice right now as to how much pain we wish to suffer. How much pain do we wish to suffer? How much pain do we wish to inflict upon our neighbors, ourselves, our families, our children? Look at the air that we're breathing right now. This is not air. These are toxic chemicals. The ones that cause cancer, the ones that cause lung disease, the ones that make... Just imagine for a minute a newborn baby being taken out of the hospital and coming out and breathing the smoke that comes out on this. That little lung, just this big. So I don't think I've done anything exceptional. I'm a very selfish human being. I've lived my life exactly the way I want to, and I'm very lucky that I've been able to do so. I think we'll be in good hands, and I think nature will fix itself, and that's the root cause of my, what you might call, optimism. And there's also that perverse thing, you can't succeed because I'm on the side of the biosphere. It's never lost, So roundabout answers to very pointed questions, Cara, as you know me.
I wasn't expecting anything less, Bittu Mama. The last thing I want from you
Yeah.
is the Dalai Lama story.
There was a security reason they never told me who's coming to speak. This was not a very large meeting. It was about 150, 200 people. I won't say where, when, how, what, but it was in Mumbai. And I sat down and suddenly the door opened, and this is India. The meeting started 20 minutes late. But who came in 4 minutes after I sat down was the Dalai Lama himself. And I didn't know what to say. I thought why was he there? Then he walked all the way to the table where I was sitting and sat next to me. So I said, Your Holiness, I didn't know what to say. I was dumbstruck. I'm normally not dumbstruck. I'm always got too many words to speak. And anyway, we got talking, and he was talking about when China took Tibet. The first thing they did was almost the first thing, they took all the forests of Tibet and turned them into timber. And all the people, he said, he used this, he speaks beautifully. He said, people who do all this, they were the ones buying the timber. He was talking about the industrial north, And so I spoke to him, and at that point, a lot of people, Belinda Wright and a lot of other people who had been working on illegal tiger trade, I said, Your Holiness, I have to tell you something that, when your monks go under their orange robes, they're carrying tiger bone, they're carrying teeth, they're carrying claws. So he says, no, can't be. I said, no, it's for the horse festival. This is what Belinda told me. And he went back after that. It wasn't a happy conversation, it was slightly somber. And the bell goes ting. And so I sat down, and meeting was about to begin, and I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I looked at him, and he said, it is your duty to be happy every day of your life. Don't be guilty. Suppose you have food, don't be guilty that you have food and that person doesn't take a little and give that person. I can honestly tell you I was at the absolute pit of my life at that point. And he must be having that influence on 1,000 people. But he gave me a reason to carry on, not feel guilty. Here I am talking in English, doing all this. So what? I feel for nature. The villager feels for nature. For all I know, a whole lot of politicians feel for nature as well. I'm not better than anybody else or worse than anybody else. And he just said, just carry on and do what you have to. He put out something that said that for the horse festival, if you have old skins, you use them, but you will not do anything. But that's another story.
This was the crux of it, it's your duty to be happy. And I think so much everyone looks outside of themselves for someone else, something else to make them happy or fulfill them. And definitely in this line of work, all around me, I see my colleagues, my friends burning out, experiencing anxiety, feeling guilty for ever having fun, living a joyous life. And I think that's really why I wanted to come back to the idea of joy and happiness. But I do want to end by saying thank you. You were calling the climate crisis decades before anybody wanted to talk about it. You were the original feminist. I worked in the sanctuary office. I know how I've been surrounded by women and how I've been supported. You have been an inspiration to quite easily many thousands of young people and older people, not just across India, but the world. And I hope I get to talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for listening to The Origin Story, brought to you by the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy, in collaboration with Roundglass Sustain. Like, share, follow and subscribe to the Goethe-Zentrum Hyderabad and EkoGalaxy. Thank you for your interest in our planet, biodiversity, and closely interlinked our own well-being. Thank you for listening.